No one knew what would happen when President Trump stopped in front of a young doctor that day, but when he asked her one simple question, her answer left the entire room speechless and changed the tone of the visit forever. President Trump would arrive, shake hands, deliver a few words of encouragement, pose for photographs, and move on to the next stop. Everything was carefully timed, carefully planned, and expected to go exactly as scheduled. But what happened that day inside a small hospital room would turn out to be one of the most emotional and unforgettable moments ever witnessed. The day was bright but heavy with anticipation. Reporters lined the hallway of the Veterans Hospital, whispering into microphones and adjusting their cameras. Soldiers stood at attention, proud yet humble, waiting for the president to arrive. The air buzzed with energy. But in the middle of it all, there was a strange, quiet calm, the kind that comes before something truly meaningful happens. As President Trump walked through the hospital corridor, surrounded by Secret Service agents and staff, he noticed something that made him stop. Standing by one of the patient room doors was a young doctor, a woman in her early 30s, holding a clipboard close to her chest. Her white coat was wrinkled, her hair pulled back hastily, and the fatigue in her eyes said she hadn't slept properly in days. Yet behind that exhaustion was something powerful, quiet strength, deep compassion, and an unwavering sense of duty. President Trump slowed his pace. The press expected him to move on, but instead he walked directly toward her. Everyone watched in silence, unsure of what he was going to say. He stopped in front of her, looked her in the eye, and asked a question that no one, not even the doctor herself, expected. "Doctor," he said softly, his voice carrying a rare tone of sincerity, "tell me honestly, what keeps you going every day?" The hallway went completely silent. Even the camera shutters paused for a brief moment. The doctor froze, caught off guard by the question. Her eyes welled slightly as she met the president's gaze. In that single, still moment, between the noise, the lights, and the chaos, something shifted. It was no longer about politics, cameras, or headlines. It was about humanity. And from that moment on, everything changed. Her name was Dr. Emily Carter, a trauma surgeon who had dedicated nearly every waking moment of her life to saving others. She had been on the front lines since the early days of the pandemic, working endless shifts, skipping meals, sleeping in hospital corridors. And when the crisis finally eased, she didn't stop. She moved straight into the recovery programs for injured veterans, tending to men and women who had given everything for their country. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp, but her heart carried the weight of thousands of stories of pain, hope, and sacrifice. So when President Trump asked her that unexpected question, she didn't have a prepared answer. For a moment, she just stood there trying to find her voice. When she finally spoke, her tone was soft but full of emotion. "Sir," she began, her eyes glistening, "every morning I wake up tired, sometimes even hopeless. There are days I question whether I can do it again. But then I remember one thing. Every person I help is someone's father, mother, son, or daughter. And even if I can't save them all, I can make sure that their last moments are filled with dignity, care, and love." Her words cut through the air like a quiet storm. The hallway, once filled with the clicking of cameras and the murmuring of reporters, felt completely silent. Everyone could feel the sincerity behind every word she said. President Trump's expression softened. The usual firmness in his eyes gave way to something gentler. Respect, understanding, even sorrow. He didn't interrupt her. He just listened. Dr. Carter took a shaky breath and continued, her voice trembling but strong. "I lost my own father during my medical training," she said. "He was a veteran too. I couldn't save him. And that pain, that loss, is what drives me. Every time I step into this hospital, I see a part of him in every patient I treat. That's why I can't give up. Not ever." A single tear slid down her cheek. And without hesitation, President Trump reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for politics. It was simple humanity, a silent acknowledgement of shared loss, strength, and compassion. In that quiet moment, every person in the room felt it. A reminder that even in the hardest places, the human heart still leads the way, moved by her words. President Trump paused for a moment, visibly touched. His voice softened as he turned to Dr. Emily Carter and said quietly, "Doctor, could I see one of your patients? Someone you're caring for right now?" Dr. Carter looked surprised at the request, but nodded immediately. "Of course, Mr. President. There's someone I think you should meet," she replied. They began walking down a long corridor lined with hospital rooms. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and hope, the kind of hope that lingers even in places filled with pain. At the end of the hall, she stopped in front of a door marked Room 217. She gently pushed it open and motioned for the president to step inside. The room was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of medical monitors. An elderly man lay on the bed, thin and pale, his body connected to several machines that beeped steadily in rhythm with his heartbeat. His hands, wrinkled and frail, rested on the blanket. Dr. Carter spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "His name is William Harris, a Vietnam veteran. He hasn't spoken in days," she said. "We've done everything we can. He's been holding on, but barely. President Trump moved closer, his usual air of confidence replaced by deep respect. He stood at the bedside for a moment, simply looking at the man, not as a politician, but as one American to another. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "Soldier, it's an honor to meet you. You served this country when it needed you most." For a few seconds, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the slow rhythm of the machines. Then something extraordinary occurred. The veteran's eyelids fluttered. His lips trembled. And in a faint, raspy voice, he whispered, "Thank you, Mr. President." The air in the room shifted. Dr. Carter gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "He hasn't said a word all week." President Trump bent closer, his voice low and sincere. "You're the real hero here, Mr. Harris. Thank you for your service. From the bottom of my heart." The old soldier managed a weak smile. His trembling hand lifted slightly, reaching toward the president. Without hesitation, Trump took it gently in his own. In that brief, fragile moment, a doctor, a soldier, and a president stood connected by something far greater than titles or politics. Simple, undeniable humanity. As they stepped out of the quiet hospital room, the air in the hallway felt different, softer, heavier, almost sacred. The staff and reporters who had followed at a distance remained silent, unsure whether to speak or simply observe the rare, deeply human moment they had just witnessed. President Trump walked beside Dr. Emily Carter, his usual commanding stride replaced with a slower, more thoughtful pace. For once, the weight of the presidency didn't seem to come from politics or power. It came from the realization of what he had just seen: courage, sacrifice, and compassion in its purest form. After a few steps, he turned toward her, his voice lower, steady, and sincere. "Doctor," he began, "you could have chosen an easier life. You're talented. You could be anywhere. You could have gone into private practice, earned more money, lived without all this pain and pressure. Why stay here in this tough place day after day?" Dr. Carter paused. The question lingered in the air for a moment. She glanced down the hallway, at the closed doors, the soft hum of machines, the quiet whispers of nurses comforting families. Then she looked back at the president. Taking a slow breath, she said, "Because this is where hope still lives. In every heartbeat that fights to stay alive. In every soldier who refuses to give up. And in every family that still prays for one more miracle. Hope lives here, Mr. President, even when it hurts," she continued, her voice calm but powerful. "I stay because someone has to remind the world that compassion still matters. We can't control everything, but we can care. And sometimes that's enough to save someone's life, or at least their spirit." President Trump stood quietly, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly he nodded. His eyes glistened as he looked at her. Not as a leader speaking to a doctor, but as one human being recognizing another's strength. "Doctor," he said softly, "you just reminded me what real leadership looks like." Those nearby would later swear they saw him discreetly wipe away a tear, something rare for a man known for his toughness. A few minutes later, as President Trump exited the hospital, he didn't say much to the waiting media. No speeches, no statements. But the cameras caught a fleeting moment. The president looking up toward the sky, taking a long, deep breath, as if carrying something far heavier and far more meaningful than before. That evening, the story spread across the internet, not because it was political, but because it was deeply personal. A hospital visit that was supposed to last only an hour had turned into something unforgettable. Someone had filmed that powerful moment when President Trump, Dr. Emily Carter, and the veteran held hands. 3 people connected by compassion, service, and respect. The clip began circulating online. Within hours, millions had watched it, comment sections filled with emotion. People from all sides, supporters, critics, and even those who had never paid much attention to politics, began sharing the video. They didn't argue. They didn't debate. For once, the internet felt united by something beautiful. No one was talking about policies or headlines that night. They talked about a doctor who refused to give up, a veteran who found strength for one last thank you, and a president who stopped to ask one simple, honest question that came straight from the heart. Across social media, people wrote things like, "This reminded me what it means to care. Compassion doesn't belong to one side. It belongs to all of us. This is the kind of story the world needs more of." A week later, when the noise had quieted, Dr. Carter returned to her daily routine, caring for patients, checking charts, offering hope. But one morning, as she walked into her small office, she noticed an envelope sitting on her desk. It had no return address, just a seal from Washington, D.C. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Dr. Carter, thank you for reminding me that the strength of a nation lies not in its power, but in the compassion of its people. Donald J. Trump." She stood silently for a moment, holding the letter close. Then she smiled, a quiet, grateful smile, and placed it in a frame on her wall, not because of who had written it, but because of what it represented. It was a reminder that kindness can bridge divides, that empathy can heal wounds deeper than politics, and that sometimes one heartfelt question can touch millions. And that is why, even years later, people still talk about the day President Trump asked one simple question. And a doctor's honest answer brought tears to the world.